I know. I didn't even do it.
What if the very person you trusted most to protect you turned out to be the one you needed protection from? A highway patrol officer sworn to keep California's roads safe instead stalked young women on lonely freeways. And one night in 1986, his abuse of power ended in a brutal murder that shocked the nation. This is the story of Cara Knott, a bright 20-year-old college student whose life was stolen by a man with a badge, a gun, and a chilling secret. Welcome to Death Row Diaries. On December 27, 1986, the Knott family's world shattered forever. Cara Evelyn Knott wasn't just another name in the news. She was a daughter, a sister, and a young woman full of life. At just 20 years old, she was attending San Diego State University, majoring in child development, with dreams of becoming a teacher. Her family described her as kind-hearted, full of laughter, someone who brightened any room she walked into. That Saturday night, everything seemed normal. Cara spent time at her boyfriend's home in Escondido, a small California city not far from San Diego. Around 9:30 p.m., she kissed him goodbye, got into her car, and began the familiar drive back to her parents' house in El Cajon. The route was simple. Head south on Interstate 15, then take the usual exits toward home. Cara had driven this stretch countless times before, but this night, something went terribly, horribly wrong. The next morning, December 28th, Cara's car was found abandoned on a deserted off-ramp along I-15, the Mercy Road exit. It was a strange location, unfinished, poorly lit, and leading to nowhere. Her vehicle was parked awkwardly, as though it had been pulled off in a hurry. Not far from the car, investigators made a devastating discovery. Cara's body lay at the bottom of a 65-foot ravine, hidden in brush below a bridge. She had been beaten and strangled, her life violently taken. The Knott family's nightmare had just begun, but as police pieced together the puzzle, suspicion quickly turned towards someone unexpected, one of their own. But who would want to harm Cara? She had no enemies, no dangerous lifestyle, nothing that pointed to risk. The answer was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The man responsible wore the uniform of protection. Craig Allen Peyer was, on paper, the model officer. A 36-year-old California Highway Patrol veteran, he had spent 13 years patrolling San Diego's roads. He was clean-cut, polite, and carried himself with authority. To the public, he represented safety. To his colleagues, he was dependable. But behind the badge, a darker story lurked. For years, whispers circulated about Peyer's behavior. Female drivers, usually young and alone, reported strange, uncomfortable encounters with him. He would pull them over for vague reasons, sometimes no real violation at all. And instead of issuing a routine warning or ticket, Peyer would linger. He asked personal questions, commented on their looks, and in some cases even touched their hair or shoulders. One woman later recalled how unsettling it felt when this officer of the law leaned into her car, his hand brushing across her arm, his tone far too personal for what it was supposed to be, a professional stop. Others described how he suggested meeting up after his shift or tried to flirt while they sat nervously in the driver's seat. Complaints were made, but here's the chilling part. Nothing ever came of them. Peyer had a solid reputation within the CHP. He was respected, praised, and well-liked by supervisors. His predatory behavior was brushed off as misunderstandings, or worse, not believed at all. So when Cara Knott crossed paths with him that December night, she wasn't just unlucky. She became the victim of a predator whose red flags had been ignored time and time again. The suspicion toward Peyer grew almost immediately after Cara's body was found, because as investigators started connecting dots, they realized the last person seen near her car was none other than Officer Craig Peyer. But it wasn't just suspicions. Within days, Peyer himself would expose his guilt, not in a confession, but on live television. December 29th, just 2 days after Cara's murder, San Diego's KCS-TV was preparing a segment for the evening news. The topic? Female driver safety. How women could protect themselves from predators on the highway. And who did they ride along with for the story? CHP officer Craig Peyer. It was supposed to be a reassuring broadcast, showing the community how law enforcement was looking out for women. Peyer smiled at the camera, gave polished advice, and spoke like a seasoned protector. But viewers at home noticed something odd. Deep scratches across his face. They were fresh, raw, impossible to ignore. When asked, Peyer brushed them off with an explanation. He claimed he had fallen against a fence at the CHP station. But investigators later checked the fence. It was far too tall to cause scratches in the places they appeared. His story didn't add up. Even more damning, witnesses had spotted Peyer around the time of Cara's disappearance. A gas station attendant recalls seeing him drive in at high speed, looking disheveled and agitated, just minutes after Cara was last seen alive. The scratches, the timing, the strange behavior, all of it painted a disturbing picture. What viewers didn't know during that interview was that Cara Knott had fought back. She had scratched at his face in a desperate attempt to save her life. And those marks, broadcast for the entire city to see, were the silent testimony of her final struggle. If you've been drawn into Cara's story so far, make sure you're subscribed to Death Row Diaries. We dive deep into cases exactly like this, chilling stories of betrayal, power, and justice. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next, because this story is only going to get darker. As shocking as his TV appearance was, the floodgates really opened when other women came forward, and what they revealed was chilling.
After the KCST broadcast aired, San Diego authorities were bombarded with phone calls. Dozens of women reached out, and their stories were disturbingly similar. Each caller described being pulled over by Officer Craig Peyer, usually at night, often at the exact same deserted off-ramp where Cara's car was found. While Peyer didn't always act violent, his conduct was far from professional. Some said he touched her hair, making comments about how soft it was. Others described his hand brushing their shoulders while leaning in too close. Many recalled how uncomfortable, even violated, they felt sitting alone in the dark with an armed officer towering over them. What made it even more disturbing was how specific his type seemed to be. Most of the women were in their late teens or early 20s, driving alone, fitting Cara's age and appearance. This wasn't coincidence, it was a pattern. These testimonies confirmed investigators' growing suspicion. Cara Knott wasn't just a random victim. She was the one who finally fought back against a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years. The community's trust was shattered. The very officer people expected to protect their daughters and sisters had instead hunted them. And now, with a murdered young woman and dozens of witnesses describing the same unsettling pattern, the investigation zeroed in fully on Craig Peyer. But investigators still needed hard evidence, something beyond scratches and testimonies. What they found next would leave no doubt. The scratches on Peyer's face and the witness accounts were damning, but investigators needed more, physical evidence that would hold up in court, and that's exactly what they found. Inside Peyer's patrol car, investigators discovered a rope. Forensic experts compared the fibers from that rope to the marks around Cara's neck. The results were chilling. The impressions matched. Peyer's flashlight, dented and bloodied, was believed to have been used to strike Cara during her struggle. But it didn't stop there. On Cara's dress, analysts found a tiny golden fiber. It wasn't just any fiber. It was unusual, made from a rayon material dyed with a rare yellow pigment. Where did it come from? Investigators traced it to the shoulder patch of Peyer's California Highway Patrol uniform. That was a smoking gun. Then came the blood evidence. On one of Cara's boots was a small drop of blood. It wasn't hers. Testing revealed it belonged to someone with AB-negative blood, the rarest blood type in the world. Less than 1% of the population has it, and Craig Peyer was one of them. Investigators also examined the Mercy Road Bridge. Tire marks showed a vehicle had pulled out hastily, screeching away in a rush. All signs pointed to Peyer's patrol car. Even his logbook betrayed him. He had altered entries, hastily changing times to cover his tracks. But forensic handwriting analysis revealed the truth. His timeline didn't match reality. piece by piece, the evidence formed a horrifying picture. The trusted highway officer had pulled over Cara Knott, tried to exert control, and when she resisted, when she threatened to expose him, he attacked, strangled her with a rope, and threw her body into the ravine. But building a case was one thing, convincing a jury was another, and what happened next shocked everyone. Craig Peyer's first trial began in 1988. The courtroom was tense, filled with Cara's grieving family, law enforcement officers, and a community desperate for justice. The prosecution laid out its case: the rope fibers, the rare uniform catch fiber, the scratches, the blood on Cara's boot, and the disturbing pattern of traffic stops targeting young women. Witness after witness described Peyer's predatory behavior, but the defense countered with doubt. They argued there wasn't direct DNA proof tying him to the murder. Remember, this was the 1980s. DNA testing was still in its infancy. They floated theories of a second suspect, even suggesting that Cara's death might have been caused by someone else entirely. When the jury deliberated, the results shocked everyone. They couldn't agree. The vote was 7 to convict, 5 to acquit, a hung jury. For Cara's family, it was agony. But prosecutors weren't done. They retried the case. This time, certain speculative testimonies about another possible suspect were ruled inadmissible. The evidence was stronger, more focused. In August 1988, the verdict finally came: guilty of murder. Craig Allen Peyer was sentenced to 25 years to life. It was only the second time in California history that an on-duty CHP officer had been convicted of murder. The fall from grace was complete, from decorated patrolman to convicted killer. But even after his conviction, the ripple effects of Cara's murder continued to haunt both her family and the community.
The aftermath of Cara's murder didn't end with the conviction. In fact, the shockwave spread across California for years. Almost immediately, public trust in the California Highway Patrol was shaken. Female drivers, especially those traveling alone at night, were terrified. Reports surfaced of women refusing to pull over when officers signaled them to stop, fearing another predator in uniform. Some even drove to police stations rather than risk pulling over in a dark, isolated spot. For Cara's family, the pain never faded. In an effort to honor her, they created a memorial garden at the very site where her body had been found. It was a place of remembrance, a way to reclaim the ground where such horror had occurred. But tragedy struck again. In November 2000, Cara's father, Sam Knott, was visiting the memorial garden when he suddenly collapsed. He had suffered a fatal heart attack, just yards from where his daughter's body had been discovered 14 years earlier. To many, it felt like grief had claimed him too. Meanwhile, Peyer's own personal life unraveled. His wife, Karen, the woman he had married just 18 months before Cara's murder, stood by him during the early years of his imprisonment. But by 2007, the strain became too much. She divorced him, severing ties with the man the world now saw as a disgraced murderer. If you're finding the story as haunting as we are, hit the like button to help share Cara's story with more people. And don't forget to subscribe. Every week we bring you cases that reveal the darkest truths behind crime and justice. And while Cara's family tried to rebuild their lives, Peyer continued to fight for his freedom with parole hearings that revealed just how little he had changed. Craig Peyer was sent to California Men's Colony and San Luis Obispo, where he has remained for decades. In prison, he worked as an electrician, earning just $52 a month. His record inside was nearly spotless. No major infractions, no outbursts. But when it came time for parole, a different picture emerged. In 2004, after 17 years behind bars, Peyer faced his first hearing. He was asked to provide a DNA sample, something that could conclusively tie him to the murder or potentially prove his innocence if he truly was wrongly convicted. He refused. When pressed, he gave no explanation. That refusal, coupled with his lack of remorse, led the board to deny his request. In 2008, after serving 21 years, he tried again. Denied. In 2012, after 25 years, he stood before the board once more. Again denied. Each time, he failed to accept responsibility for Cara's murder. Today, Peyer is still in bars. His next chance for parole is scheduled for January 2027, when he will be nearly 77 years old. The community and Cara's surviving family have made it clear they intend to oppose his release with everything they have. And that brings us to the question that lingers even decades later.